Today we have the second half of our Back to the New Workplace post-COVID-19 webinar with Professor Ramesh Raskar and 3 of our MIT startups. In the first session last week, Professor Kokam and Dr. Derry talked about the bigger picture of going back to work around social and policy considerations as well as in the employee experience. You mentioned in the poll result that the technology solution is a key part of what you and your company are focused on for returning to work. The good news is today we'll be delving much more into that practical technology solutions aspect with more real-life back-to-work scenarios. Let me share today's agenda with you. First, we'll hear from Professor Raskar speaking on COVID safe paths and PathCheck, the digital contact tracing nonprofit he spun out from MIT. Then we'll hear from 3 of our startups, BioBot, Tulip, and Humanize, who are focusing on different aspects of that returning to work solution. Then we'll have a panel with Professor Raskar, the startups, and Jeff Delmore of FM Global, representing the corporate voice. That panel will be moderated by Michael Schrigg from MIT Sloan. So let's get started. I'll be introducing Professor Raskar, who is speaking first. At the MIT Media Lab, Professor Raskar's research focus is on AI imaging for health and sustainability. These interfaces span researching physical, digital, and global domains. He has received a Lemelson Award for his groundbreaking inventions and a number of other distinguished awards. He's worked on advising special research projects at Google, Facebook, and at Apple. So he knows the ins and outs of these tech giants as well. He has also co-founded multiple MIT startups. Yesterday, he testified at a congressional hearing on the same topic. Take it away, Professor Raskar.
Hello, everyone. What a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Rebecca. Last time when we spoke on this platform, which is getting started, and as Rebecca said, we have spun out the MIT Safe Paths work into a nonprofit foundation, PathCheck Foundation. So I'm going to share some slides and walk you through some of these ideas. But I'm going to focus mainly on the learning. So I'm supported by Chris Kreis, who is a doctor and a software entrepreneur, and also part of the PathCheck Foundation. So let's talk about reopening businesses. And PathCheck Foundation is building solutions not only for public health, but also for this new start for countries, states, and employers that are open source, privacy first, and interoperable. The first versions are based on GPS. The new versions are based on Google, Apple, Bluetooth solutions. And the versions upcoming will have other case management and public health solutions as well. Just a brief summary of what we discussed last time, which is on the left, we have the app that's going to the employers or citizens or students, exposure notification, personal guidance. And on the right, we have the Safe Places dashboard that's used by public health and businesses. So you can improve the tracing conversation, your contact tracing dashboards, heat maps, and so on. And then our code base, which is the largest nonprofit open source code base for COVID-19, supports the whole range of APIs, GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, QR codes, and everything else. And the challenge really is how do you do this in a privacy-preserving way? So we have 3 arms, the technology arm, the think tank, and implementations. In technology, we are doing the app, the web tool, the algorithms, the SDK, everything is open source. Think tank, we have interoperability standards, how to work with stakeholders, landscape analysis. So, check our website, and implementation with public health and employers and a lot of corporate relations. So we are also delighted with that we have a fantastic alliance. In fact, next week we'll be making an announcement with some big Fortune 500 companies who have joined us in various ways, either as tech players or implementation players, or contributing talent, or using our sources, and so on. So keep a watch on that for next week. Some of you probably have questions about the Google Apple Proximity API. And the way it works is if 2 people, Alice and Bob, and let's say Bob is going to get infected at some point, When Alice and Bob meet, maybe Bob did not know that he's infected. At some point, Bob gets infected, and he uploads the keys, the Bluetooth keys that they have exchanged over a broadcast channel, and then Bob uploads them to the server. And at some point, Alice downloads all those keys to see all the keys that she has heard over the Bluetooth broadcast is the same key that she received from the server. And if there's a match, then she knows she was exposed by Bob. So it's a pretty clean, simple technology. And we do the same thing for GPS, we do the same thing for Wi-Fi and so on. So only the infected person has to upload some information. The 99.99% of the people who are not infected never have to upload anything at all. And that's how privacy is maintained. And if they do upload, it's all encrypted. So when you think about the experience flow for an individual, from the moment they get exposure notification to the moment they might be infected, infected and have to upload the information, it's an emotional roller coaster for most people. And so our team is made up of not just technologists, but epidemiologists, behavioral scientists, legal, privacy, and so on. And we all work together to figure out what this solution should be, and we put it out in the public domain. But we are very fortunate with a few $1 million of philanthropic funding. So we have hardcore software engineers building extremely high quality code as well. So from exposure notification, you come to triaging, symptom checking, quarantine or not, test or not, what happens 14 days after you have come out of those conditions or not. So we look at this holistic picture. And again, as a software company, anybody can build this. The challenge is how do they do this in a privacy preserving way? So all the machine learning, all the encryption, all the decentralization has to work without the name or email or employee ID or a national ID. Anything's identifiable should not be used for this process. And that's why some of the MIT magic comes in. Yes. So just want to make sure that when we mean by privacy, it's not about the individual privacy, but it's also about consent. It's also about regulations. Often you cannot share the data because of HIPAA regulations. Sometimes it's about trade secrets. You may be an employer and you cannot share your data with insurance player or the pharma players. Or it's national security. You might have people in Singapore and Asia and Europe, and as they travel across boundaries, you simply cannot use the information that's kind of held by those countries in the systems. And again, what's the incentive for an employee or a citizen to participate? They can just switch it off. So these are all very complex issues from human behavior and human incentives that we work on as well. So let me share with you a few learnings on the last 3 months we have spent this implementing with many Fortune 500 players, working with many governments. We already have contracts for several US states and territories and nations. So I'll be first one to admit that it's a humbling experience because we thought we can build something and it'll work. It's a very complex situation. And I have built many startups from my own bare hands with teams, but there's nothing that matches the scale and importance of what we are doing. And so we're being very honest of what works and what doesn't work. So when it comes to businesses, what they've noticed is that businesses do not want to access the healthcare data of their employees. And even location data is considered very sensitive because it's personally identifiable. And without consent is out of question. So that's all considered invasive. At the same time, businesses do want some control and some command and control dashboard-like concept. And they also want notions of passport, like who has which symptoms, whether they have tested or not, exposures. And what we have noticed is that everything that people are doing right now is very scattershot. Like symptom checking is very annoying because people do it for 3 days. And the 4th day, they just click random buttons to say, I'm fine, I'm just going to come into work. If they have already done the test, you have to close the loop with testing facility. So this tension between centralization and decentralization of employee data is a major issue. And what we have been able to convince many employers, is that they should use decentralization. They should not worry about capturing so much data about their employees that employees start playing games and they stop using the apps, they stop using the pendants and the Bluetooth tags or UWB tags that are being sold on the market for $100 or $200. It's all technology. It doesn't work for when the human ingenuity, the human laziness starts getting around it. There's also the confusion about should you use Bluetooth or GPS, because Bluetooth, the Google Apple exposure notification can only be used by states and nations and not by businesses. So what do you do? So we're also working through those issues. And then finally, I would say this is the most important. Employers simply do not, an employer X doesn't want to give an app to their employees saying, hey, here's an app by X, our company, so download it and use it. Because employees, especially in large companies, will not allow the infringement on their personal freedom. And we have noticed this again and again. So the relationships we have built with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and others is that they would like us, they would like PathCheck to be almost like the LEED certification or a fair trade kind of organization. It's open source, non-profit, auditable. So we provide the front end. We take the mantle of privacy and personal freedom and security, and we provide that solution to the employees, and the employers then talk to our app to create the dashboards. And when we upload any micro or macro aggregation of data from this app, we take care of all the privacy constraint so that even the most malicious employer will not be able to reconstruct anything about the employees. At the same time, the workers will feel safe, and the employee can create dashboards for all the policies, what's working and what's not working. So it's a good symbiotic relationship where PathCheck takes care of the pesky issues of privacy, personal freedom, and data protection, and the employers get the benefit of having dashboards. And so, here are some slides. I won't talk into them about them in detail, but a classic business experience would have the same. Employee shows up, they have to do a test on the site. What happens, if there's a 24 hours to 48 hours delay of somebody was infected or not? If they're infected, what do you do? If they're not infected, what does it mean to still allow them to practice social distancing, staggering schedules, and so on? So some of the things we are doing ourselves with PathCheck. For others, we are partnering with other innovators, either startups or other organizations. They provide the other part of the stack, and together we make an offering so that it's privacy preserving, but still allows you to have this command and control structure around it. And so in that sense, SafePath is working with many stakeholders, not just governments and public health, but also with workers and labs and healthcare and insurance and schools. And we are learning a lot, and we are putting out our documents, on a regular basis of what we're learning. We just put out a document yesterday on the relationship between manual contact tracing and digital contact tracing, because most organizations will have to set up some small stuff. It could be one person or 100 people who are just call center, command and control, and how do they interface with the apps that are out there? Again, there's no literature on it, there's no playbook on it. So we're putting out our experiences and sharing it with the rest of the world. And then on the MIT, that's on the PathCheck Foundation side. And at MIT, we continue to do cutting edge research in machine learning and encryption and digital health. So these are some of the papers that are on our website. How do you do Wi-Fi co-location, GPS intersection? How do you do multi-hop analysis on Bluetooth? How do you preserve encryption? How do you do hashing? How do you do machine learning in presence of encryption? So please take a look. We're putting the papers out literally the day after we feel proud enough, we put it out. We don't wait for the review cycles, and we still submit them for review. So, we are getting out of the academic mode and making sure we're focused on the goal here. So when we talk about the kind of machine learning aspect of COVID-19, the classic challenge is, again, the debate between privacy and utility. On the horizontal axis, it's it progressively more privacy. So anonymization, we think about three main pillars of privacy: confidentiality, anonymity, and privacy, right? And confidentiality simply means some people can see everything. And in today's world, that's just not going to work. Anonymity helps to a little bit, but with an overlapping data set, anonymity can also, you can crack open anybody's identity. So anonymity is, we think of basically no privacy. But that's great for machine learning. So the vertical axis is, can you do statistics on the data? Can you run any inference on the data? Or can you do full-fledged machine learning? Can you learn the AI? And for machine learning, if we are going to do questionnaires from your employees, or you have sensors or video or audio, you have all this data coming in, and you want to train some networks, neural networks, to train that, how are you going to deal with that information, whether it's on smartphone or some other edge devices? And so what we have realized is that anonymization is probably the best in terms of utility, but worse in terms of privacy. Encryption is great for privacy, but suffers in machine learning. So two techniques have emerged. We call it smashing, called federated learning and federated learning and split learning. And split learning is from our group at MIT, and it allows you to get sufficient privacy, at the same time allows you to do full-fledged machine learning. So it's almost magical that data stays on the phones or edge devices, and we can still create a global AI for any task you may have. And this technique is useful in other scenarios as well. We're applying it to getting back to work for COVID-19. And kind of I won't have time to go into detail of the technology, but the key idea here is instead of sharing raw data from those edge devices like smartphones and cameras and so on, we just share the wisdom. We just share the features of the data as opposed to sharing the raw data. And that's how we maintain the privacy of the data. So to conclude, we think contact tracing, case management, and advising employees and citizens and students on our premises is very critical to reopen businesses. And whether it comes to machine learning or encryption or digital health, PathCheck as a foundation is committed to creating open source, extremely high-tech research and development and getting it out there. And MIT SafePaths is committed to doing high-quality research and contributing to open source and working with our partners at MIT. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you, Ramesh. You have done quite a bit of hard work with your team. We heard you testified yesterday on a panel before the Congressional Task Force on Exposure Notification and Contact Tracing. Would you care to share some of the issues and how they could be addressed?
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. I think it was a wonderful experience to do the congressional testimony on contact tracing. I think the points that kept on coming up, I was one of the 4 panelists yesterday. And the question that kept on coming up was, first of all, what should be the national response, which right now is in disarray. But maybe the second point, which was very important, is this notion that government will likely consider nonprofit and open source entities to do contact tracing. And that's an interesting, subtle point, because if you're not a nonprofit or open source, then it's very easy for the contact tracing app to get misused. For any large employer, and if states and nations are deploying it, then you can imagine if 60-70% of your state on their smartphone is using this one app, is extremely powerful. Even some of the most popular social apps, don't have 60-70% penetration. So given that it's extremely powerful, and they're thinking about making it from nonprofit and open source, because even though you're using privacy preserving techniques, there are fancy things you can do on the server side using metadata that could be problematic. And the third point that keeps coming up is, how do we marry the manual contact tracing with digital contact tracing? Because the government has spent tens of millions of dollars to create an army, effectively call centers and case management centers, but they're becoming very inefficient. Just today, Boston Globe has an article where about half the people were laid off from the 1,700 people they had hired to do manual contact tracing because the number of cases in Massachusetts are coming down. So ramping up and ramping down manual contact tracing is just not possible. And so the digital apps are going to play a very critical role. So again, kind of a coordinated response, nonprofits and open source doing apps, and merging manual and digital contact tracing.
Thank you. So on another question related to that, there are so many organizations developing products for contact tracing. Can you characterize the landscape a bit and where there might be synergies with SafePaths and PathCheck?
Yeah, so SafePaths, MIT Research, PathCheck is the foundation that deploys the solution. We are here to not compete, but collaborate. In fact, we are here to enable everybody else. So we already are building our own primary app and server and dashboard in many US states and territories and nations. So we're delighted that we'll be the primary brand in those states and countries. At the same time, there's some other players who already are trying to build, and they're a little bit confused because the R&D required is too complex, or as I said earlier, and Chris is online, that's great. As we said earlier, they don't want to use their own brand because it's too risky for them to be out there. So either from an R&D point of view or from a brand point of view, PathCheck is helping those entities as well. So whether you're a state or a nation or a large employer, you can use the PathCheck brand. Chris, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. So we've been talking to a lot of businesses since the very beginning, both businesses looking for help and businesses who'd like to work with us and partner with us. And we actually have a formal partnership program. So you can join us at a basic level, an ecosystem member. That just means you're part of the team. You can join us at a gold or platinum level, which means that we're going to give you some support at varying levels. And you can also join us as a technology partner where you're literally using our technology, building it into yours, or vice versa, where you're actually helping us to build our technology. So we have several options for partnerships and working with us.
Great, thank you, Chris. So it's been proposed that government agencies might be requiring COVID-related data from companies. How might SafePath's dashboards help a company transfer this information?
I think I have not heard that so far, but I would say, again, there's confidentiality, anonymity, and privacy. And privacy means other than the individual, other than the worker, nobody else, not PathCheck, not the employer, not the government, nobody gets to know anything about this individual, any personally identifiable data, not their location, not their name, none of that, not even their IP address, and ideally, but all the services are provided. And you think this seems kind of a mismatch. How can you do that? How can you provide services to somebody without knowing anything about them? And that's already possible. The technology for that from a computer science point of view is already available. It's just that we have to deploy it in the right way and deploy it at scale, because we're talking about deploying it to billions of people now. That has never been done in a matter of weeks and matter of months. And that's the role PathCheck is playing. Like when we see that green padlock in a browser that makes us feel comfortable typing our credit card address, so the browser doesn't know it, your Google Chrome doesn't know it, even the merchant doesn't know your credit card number, but you're still able to buy those things from that merchant. It's the same philosophy here.
That's great. Rebecca, back to you.
I think we'll have time for a couple more questions since
Okay.
we're running a bit ahead. Yeah.
Sure.
Actually, I see Joey Hasty asked about tourism and travel, and I just want to answer that because that's a great question, because many of our earliest adopters are actually tourist locations, and they're very concerned about getting started as soon as possible, obviously, for the summer season. And so we are working with them closely, and we do have solutions for them. What's really interesting is that sometimes it's challenging because you have to host these solutions in various locations, and you wouldn't always be able to cross the data over. So we actually are working on interoperability solutions that could allow a traveler from one country to still be covered when they land in a new country.
That's great. Another question is, are you working with any behavioral scientists to test out best practices for use and adoption?
Oh, definitely. This is something that we did right in the beginning. So, Dan Ariely, that some of you might know from Irrational Viewers, is part of our team, and Julian Zlatev, a very famous professor from Harvard, also behavioral scientist, is also on our team. And so we have some amazing people, and not just for employers, also for nations. We're running pilots because, as you know, behavior is very culture and region specific. And so we're running a lot of pilots, and hopefully we'll be able to share some results from that. We also have a separate program on incentives, not just carrots, but also sticks. So not just sticks, but also carrots in how people should use these solutions. Hopefully we'll have a lot more to share in the coming weeks. But the early engagements, only thing we know is this is not a trivial problem to solve. So if your company is thinking about, hey, we have an IT department, they can build a solution and we can use it for our employees, that's not how this is going to get rolled out. There are a lot of complexities of privacy, ethics, and behavior, as you said, that play a role.
Okay. And I guess, well, there are a few other questions. What can you suggest as the key learnings of what you've been doing over the last month, how things have pivoted and changed that we should know about?
Yeah, I think we started with GPS because we knew Bluetooth is very challenging. When I took a sabbatical leave from MIT, I was at Facebook for 2 years, 2016, and actually built a very large team to do Bluetooth-based, proximity analysis. And we realized this is actually, very, very pesky problem. So we talked to Apple and Google recently, and they said, there's not much we can do. And then a few weeks later, fortunately, they released the API. So once they released the API, fortunately, we knew in advance. We're also using the Apple Google Bluetooth APIs. So there have been a lot of pivots around that. And also we realized that working with states and governments is easier for us because we're a nonprofit and have the brand. At the same time, working with employers is great for us because it's a very quick turnaround cycle for us. Especially if you're a large employer in a state and you have some influence on the state. Chris can tell you more, but we have been that has been a great relationship for us to work with a large employer and ask them to help us navigate the regulatory environment in that state. Chris, do you just have a sentence or two there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So we've definitely been approaching from all angles, going straight to government when possible, but going to businesses and schools when not possible, and actually trying to form coalitions between schools and even businesses to help us put pressure on government, because government is not always responsive. So we are taking these going around the back if we have to.
Yeah, and the international scenario is also great because, a large employer is a very important kind of an economic engine in those countries. And they say, listen, hey, I have, tens of thousands of employees who cannot go to work unless you, state, change the regulation and work with an open source nonprofit. It's a lose-lose. So those are good conversations as well.
Great. And do you want to say anything about the pros and cons of digital passports and the key to adoption on those?
Yeah. So there's a lot of controversy around the serology tests. And I'm not a biologist, so I don't want to get into that region. There is certain value to creating some kind of a passport on, say that it's okay for me to go back to work, or I have recovered, and so on. And so, yes, we actually work with credential verification companies who provide us tools for that, and we have some other partners. So we don't build the solutions ourselves. We use existing technologies to embed them with us. So there's a lot of value in creating some kind of a passport. We also have a team out of South Africa called COVID, and they build QR code-based solutions that they have integrated with us. So they're deploying it in many scenarios where you cannot expect the employees to have latest smartphones. So even if you have a feature phone, even if you have no phone at all, these QR code-based solutions actually work pretty well. So that's also part of our offering. So I think there's a lot to. It has to be multi-pronged. It's not one hammer that solves all the problem. And I think that there's a lot to learn. We are sharing our learnings as we go.